Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. We also have a Discord, Facebook, Insta, Blue Sky, X, all the things, and you can find out more about all those also on our website through our link tree. It's like one thing where you can access everything. Anyway, before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we could talk about horrific things. Those could include sensitive subjects such as all the things. I'm not going to say them all. There's, but discretion is advised. And with that out of the way, Steve, what do we got coming up?
Holidays, for one thing.
Those are happening, aren't they?
Yes. We've got material queued up to take us through the holidays, so that's good. We are still doing 3 events weekly on Discord. We stream a movie on Saturday, and then on Sunday we stream one of our episodes. And then Chris also streams himself working on his horror-themed webcomic called Pieces. You can find the link to our Discord server on our homepage, as Chris said, horrormakesushappy.com. But today we are talking to Mr. Neil McRobert, a podcaster himself and also an author, best known for his Talking Scared podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Before we get into the meat of the interview, you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on a very, very brief hiatus from the show. I've decided to start taking a break between like Halloween and Christmas just to give me some breathing room because it's been 4 years of weekly episodes and reading a book or two for each. So I'm kind of broken. I'm coming back in mid-December with like the typical sort of Christmas deep dives. I get kind of big and heavy at Christmas. So I'm doing a deep dive into Kings from a Buick 8. I have the State of the Horror Nation episode that people seem to like, where I get like a group of well-read individuals to come and talk about the highlights of horror from that year. And then fun. Into the new year I've already got like the first half of the year booked out. It's nuts how far in advance I have to plan this thing now. So that's kind of the show. And in my other life, in writing, I'm going to carry on writing for, I don't know, I freelance for Vulture and Esquire and The Guardian and a few places, and that's getting harder in the current climate. Freelancing is really difficult. So, anyone has any tips, let me know. But I've also got my debut novella is coming out next October, which feels a long way off, but counting the days, and that's a novella that's called Good Boy. It's from Wild Hunt Books, and it is about, I've got my elevator pitch done quite early. It's about a small town, the monster that haunts it, and the very, very, very brave little dog that fights back.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Everybody likes a dog story.
It's a cynical cash grab.
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, that's part of it too.
He tells it like it is.
I mean, I can relate. I'm writing a story right now and drawing a comic where I'm including dogs because people like dogs.
Yeah, just don't kill them. Just don't kill them.
No, you never kill the dogs. You kill the people and you mercilessly torture them, but the dogs are fine.
I was debating on making that joke when you mentioned the dog. I'm like, does the dog die at the end?
There's a website for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're definitely going to have us outclassed on the literature side. I know for a fact that I believe you've read all 77 Stephen King novels?
Yeah. So, there are 83 books, supposedly. I'm not quite sure what the other sort of 6 are, because I've read 77, and that's all of them, a few times. But when people do these questionnaires, it always seems to be how many out of 83 have you read, and I'm not sure what the gap is there. So I don't think he slipped 6 books past me. But yeah, I've read them all. I'm quite the nerd. I read them all in 1 year in kind of
what?
I read everything he wrote in 1 year in consecutive order.
Did you sleep?
I read pretty fast, and I read King pretty fast. I read about 70 books a year for the show, but I read King really fast. So yeah, I read them all, and it was great fun because you start to spot all of the things that you perhaps haven't spotted already. I mean, everyone knows the big links, but it all starts to make a lot more sense when you read them in the order in which you wrote them.
Oh, yeah.
And when you read them that quickly, because you pick it up before you've had time to forget.
Exactly. It's still fresh in your mind.
One big patchwork story by the end, King's Dominion, as they all call it.
Yeah. Almost sounds like the way he intended them to be read. Listen, everyone else, You got to step up your game. Read all my books in a year, or you won't get it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the only way to do it.
Nice.
Well, we briefly talked about the theme of this interview. We're going to be talking less about your body of work and more about yourself as a fan of horror, going from childhood through teenage years into adulthood. And then towards the end, we'll talk about any common themes that have cropped up throughout the call. But that said, it's not meant to be a therapy session. So if there's any questions you don't want to answer, you just say pass and we'll move on. But starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Can I say first, what a great idea for a podcast this is, by the way.
Like, Thank you.
I started listening recently because you've had quite a lot of guests on that I've interviewed, and I listened to the Clay McLeod Chapman episode, and Clay's always like a firework display of a man, but you get great stuff out of him, and it's just such a good idea for a podcast. Because I find myself obnoxiously interesting, and obviously I try to put that on other people. But because I have, as we'll hear in the course of this conversation, I have really strange relationships with horror. And I find them interesting, not in an egocentric way. It's not about me. It's about if I was a case study. My relationship with horror is odd. So I've been looking forward to this as a way to perhaps delve into my own inner workings. But sorry, I've already derailed the conversation. What was the question?
That'll happen multiple times. It's quite fun.
Yeah, I'm guessing you've only heard the edited version. Some of our calls have been quite lengthy. lots of little tangents like that. Yeah. I mean, when Chris and I were talking about it, you may or may not have heard us talk about this before, but so the gist of how we came up with the idea for the podcast was Chris's webcomic. It's a horror themed webcomic. The original website was called Pieces-Compendium, which there's a couple of us who are friends who work in the IT business. And we kind of pointed out to Chris that number one, hyphens aren't great in URLs because people forget whether or not they should be one. And compendium, who's going to remember how to spell that? And so we were brainstorming, trying to come up with other URLs that we could give him that might be better. When I came up with Horror Makes Us Happy, and I was like, that's a great URL, but it won't work for his comic because his comic is very much not happy.
It's a little dark.
So we were like, so what are we going to do with this? And in brainstorming that, then one of our mutual friends said, well, what is it about horror that makes people happy? And that's when the logo went on. And as we talked about it more, we really liked the idea because, as you say, it's a little different from what some of the other podcasts are doing. And when we do get these people on who are creators in the business, it is a bit refreshing to get them to allow them to talk about things, their own love of horror from when they were a child starting off. It's not just talking about your body of work and what's coming next and the things that they get to talk about in their promotional work, 1,000 times. So, anywho, starting with your childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Ooh, so my very earliest memory, I can do my earliest memory of being scared. And I know I was under 4 because I lived in a house that I didn't live in after I was 4. And this story kind of goes nowhere analytically, but we had a carnival. I live in the north of England in a very, very strange northern village. Have you ever seen the TV show The League of Gentlemen? Are you aware of that?
The League of Gentlemen?
Not The Extraordinary League of Gentlemen. It's a British TV show about a town full of kind of gothic archetypes. There's the butcher is a cannibal, and there are people on the hill who live in this house, and they have a local shop that is only for local people, and their brother and sister in an incestuous relationship, and they have a mutant son in the attic, and there's all this weird stuff. It's a comedy. It's very, very dark comedy. They based it on my hometown. That is not a lie. It is literally inspired by the town I grew up in, for good reason.
Well, that is awesome, and you had me at Cannibal Butcher, and I will be watching this show.
Yeah, it's masterful. It's Mark Gatiss, from the actor Mark Gatiss from like Sherlock, and he's in everything these days. It's him and 2 other people who are going to make a show called Inside Number 9. It's just wonderfully British macabre, but based on my hometown. And as part of my hometown, we had a carnival that was very much not the Mardi Gras carnival. This was local businesses getting flatbed trucks and having sort of dancing people in costume, and it would go down the street outside my house. And when I was under 4, I remember a gorilla ran up my garden, a man in a gorilla costume, just to clarify, ran up my garden path and kind of hugged me, and I freaked out. And it's my first memory of being terrified. Yeah, there's nothing to say about that really. A big man in a suit grabbed me as a kid. He's scary. You know what I mean? That's my first memory.
Yeah. I mean, you did say this was when you were 4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fairly terrifying thing to occur.
I mean, never gets less scary, really. A man in a gorilla suit grabbing you without, asking. But
consent.
Yeah. When you're 4, not good. And then when I was a little bit older, my parents, who wonderful, wonderful parents, but never really in any way monitored my media intake or what I kind of got up to, or just kind of let me loose on the wild west of 90s pop culture. They took me to a little local town where there was kind of like a walk. You Americans have these amazing walk through haunted houses. We don't have those in the UK. We just don't have the budget. No ways. Halloween in the UK is a tawdry, terrible affair. And this local town had built one of those. And my mum took me through, and I must have been no more than 6. And all I remember is at one point, this is how hardcore it was. I was walking down some stairs underneath a wax figure that had been crucified and disemboweled. And I think my mum realised this wasn't the cute haunted house experience that she perhaps had anticipated. And I came out of there traumatised. And I think that may have started my love of all things horror. But you know what? I've given you 2 really answers you can't do anything with. My love of horror started with monsters. My dad, as a young boy, used to talk to me about myths and legends and about cryptids and weird stuff. Like just this week, I'm writing somebody else's podcast, a podcast called Unexplained. I write for them, and they have episodes all about half-hour episodes about weird, unexplained mysteries. And just this week, I wrote an episode all about the supposed existence of a dinosaur still in the Congo called the Macaulay Mbembe. And that is a thing my dad told me when I was like 8 years old, and it just ignited something in my brain. Like
I think I've heard of this one. Is it like a miniature brontosaurus kind of?
It is, yeah. I find it. I mean, it's clearly an elephant or something, but I just like to believe there are still... I like to believe that Here Be Dragons is still relevant, And I just love monsters. And my dad told me these tales of like Odysseus and the and the I can't remember his name now, the Cyclops, and all that stuff.
I just referenced this like 2 weeks ago.
Polymephus, it's just come back to me, Polyphemus or something like that. And yeah, I just fell in love with monsters, and it started from there. And ghosts and weird stuff. Never so much UFOs, weirdly, but ghosts and monsters and secrets and unexplained things. And I've never stopped loving it. I've never stopped being fascinated by, and it's morphed into, I'm now fascinated by the folklore and the story and the narrative and the history a little bit more than the nutsness. But I still love the nutsness. But when I was a kid, couldn't get enough of it, and it went from there. But I can give you specific instances of things I loved, but depends on what you want to know.
Well, first off, it's one thing that I find to be really funny, and it's going to drive me nuts because I can't remember who it is, but there was some other guest that we had that talked about having someone in a gorilla suit scare the shit out of him when he was a kid.
You're right. That's not going to be an easy thing to parse our podcast episodes for. Right? But you're absolutely right. There was another guest.
I want to say it was Philip Fracassi, and it was in a parking lot of a restaurant it was a pirate-themed restaurant. I want to say it was Fracassi, but I could be wrong about that. But I
don't think they were actually absconded by said gorilla. No, I think they just like he was maybe doing a march or something, and he was running at him.
I don't know, but
you're right. There was another guest that was
hilarious. That it's like that meme. It's if I had 2 nickels, I'd only have 10 cents, but it's just weird that's happened twice.
It tracks with Phil Fracassi as well, because me and Phil agree about a lot of things. So maybe that's the kernel that turns you into that kind of horror fan.
Right?
Yeah, Phil is Phil is possibly my favorite horror writer currently working. Like I love his fiction so much. So maybe there's some overlap in our brain there that was kicked off by a gorilla in a suit. Yeah.
I'll have to go back and double check. If it was him, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Let's see. So you mentioned, I wanted to ask about the haunted house, this disemboweled wax figure. You mentioned you were traumatized by that. And it's kind of like what I picked up on is what the lack of something. So you said you were traumatized, and then you also said that's where my love of horror started. But your voice was very flat there, so so it didn't sound like there was a love of horror there, and so I wanted to ask about that a little bit.
So,
did you feel excitement in that?
I will just say I'm quite hungover, and the caffeine's starting to kick in. So the ebb and flow of my voice may pick up as we go.
Okay.
I mean, I have only the most fragmentary memories of that, if I'm honest. But the timeline of me and horror kicked off shortly after.
Okay.
So I think there was probably some link, and I don't want to get too into the weeds. I just talk for hours about myself, and it's a real cringe thing that I do. But you know, those of you doing this show in particular will have talked a lot to people, I imagine, who talk about the thrill of being frightened and, you know, the appeal of it and the excitement. I'm not sure I've ever enjoyed being frightened.
Okay.
I don't think I have the normal relationship with horror that other people have. And this may get more persistent when we get later into my life because it's got worse and I'm more frightened now than I ever was before. But as a kid, I don't remember being particularly perturbed by much in terms of media. Nightmare on Elm Street is the primal horror story of my life because I was terrified of Freddy Krueger long before I saw that film. Because I have this theory that there's always a cultural boogeyman, and it goes back before me, but in my lifetime, it basically is like Freddy Krueger. Then you got Slender Man, and now we have Siren Head. And you spoke to Trevor Henderson, right? And
yes,
you know, he's made the next iteration of the great cultural boogeyman. And I know loads of friends who have like 8-year-old kids who are terrified of Siren Head. But it was Freddy Krueger for me. And Freddy Krueger horrified me and terrified me in a way that I've never fully got away from. And when I first watched Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 12, dear God, that film did a number on me. And if I was to pick one scene in my entire life that sums up what horror can do, it's the scene at the start of Nightmare 1 when Tina is being ripped asunder on the ceiling by something you can't see. Oh my God, that terrified me. But that's the only thing I really remember from being an adolescent that I read or watched that genuinely like disturbed me. Everything else, I just remember being fascinated, just so fascinated by how dark a story could go. And I read stuff really young and like precociously. I got in a lot of trouble at school for reading like James Herbert, The Rats. I remember I had it we had some reading we were given. We had to read a book because clearly we had a hungover English teacher who was like, yeah, Friday mornings, read a book. And nice. We had these books and I had my paperback copy of The Rats inside it and reading about these rats eating this baby, you know, and I got caught and told off and got given detention. And my dad kind of went to war for me and was like, he can read what he wants. So I was really precocious, but I don't remember ever being disturbed, just fascinated.
Did you have any really scary dreams or reoccurring nightmares when you were a kid?
That's a good question. That's right. Not that comes to mind. I mean, a lot of this stuff becomes more prominent as I turn 30 because I'm nothing if not contrary, and my normal emotional development has gone backwards seemingly. But all of that stuff started in my adulthood. As a kid, I was a very anxious child. I had really severe hypochondria. I would worry about things like the world ending. Like I was very, very anxious, but never about stuff like that. That's happened later. But when I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, I had a nightmare that night and I was convinced that was it. And that's how that film works so well, right? Because it literally, it ports its own mechanism onto you. It's almost a meta experience if you're built the right way.
It is, you know, it was, there's a big meta craze in the last 10 years or so, but Nightmare on Elm Street was kind of ahead of the curve that way, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it makes it your problem. And I remember that Christmas Eve having a nightmare that Freddy was after me, and I've had Freddy Krueger dreams for the rest of my life where he's in my dreams and very rarely acts threateningly towards me, but I wake up and in that, and we'll talk a lot today about me and sleep. It's a big part of my later horror relationship. More for bad than good. But when you wake up in that interstitial space between the hypnagogia, is it hypnagogia, hypnopompic? I don't know, between sleep and awake. If I've had a Kruger dream, and I even call them Kruger dreams, that's why I say to my wife, I had a Kruger dream. And if I wake up for 30 seconds, I cannot get outside the bubble in which that means he's after me. And then I kind of puncture the bubble. It's like, oh no, it was a dream. It's fine. He's not real. But even now, as a 41-year-old man, if I have a dream about that scarred bastard, I wake up in terror for about 30 seconds.
Okay. Was there ever anything in childhood that scared you in real life?
Oh God. I'm an open book, but I don't want to get too dark. So if I start going like a bit too dreary on this, I had this terror that if ever I was out away from somebody I loved, I wouldn't see them again. That something would happen, whether it be a plane crash or a car crash, or I remember in the wake of my granddad's death, if my parents went somewhere, went over dinner and I was being babysat, I would be convinced they wouldn't come home. And it was haunting. It was torturous, And then when I started going away, I was convinced that something would happen to me and I wouldn't get home to them. And that, I think, came from the suddenness and the unexpectedness of my grandfather's death. I don't know. That's COD psychology. I mean, who knows?
Right.
But it wasn't a frightening thing, but it was a thing that led to a great deal of fear,
Okay. All right. The next two questions we're going to ask as a pair. We'll start with the negative one so we can end on the positive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the first person you hurt?
Oh, wow. Well, this might be a worrying riposte, but do you mean emotionally or physically?
Either or.
God, it's so weird. People don't see this side of me on the podcast because I'm so nice these days. I fought a lot as a kid. I'm a tiny little man. I'm a tiny, slim, bird-like little man who most people could tie into a pretzel and throw away, I am not tough. But when I was a kid, I was frightened of nothing because my dad, for context, my dad is a lot older than most dads. My dad was 47 when I was born. So he was born in 1936. So he had a life that was like belongs to most people's grandparents, and he grew up in like the rough side of Manchester. He worked in like the building trade all his life. He's a tough man, my old man. And this sounds damning, but my father has never met a problem that he doesn't think will go away if you hit it hard enough. And I kind of got. My dad's a great guy. Like, don't be wrong. Like, he's never laid a hand on me. He's like the most gentle soul in the world, but he's frightened of nobody. And I got brought up in a time, one, when violence amongst kids was way more acceptable. That just wasn't a weird thing if you got in a fight in school. It wasn't a big deal at all. Yeah. And he brought me up to just be willing to fight and to hit someone first before they got a chance to hit you. And there are physical altercations I've got into where I think they're but for the grace of God. Mm-hmm. Like nights out where I've lashed out. If that had gone the wrong way, who knows? I could have been arrested. So that person could have been harmed. I could have been harmed, Mm-hmm. So in terms of hurt, I don't need to go into details, but like a nasty fight in the schoolyard. Yeah. And even now I don't regret it because he was a bully and he was trying to bully me and I didn't let him bully me. But that's the first person I hurt physically. Emotionally, the first person I remember hurting is my first girlfriend who, there's no great story there. I was just a 16-year-old dick. I just like immature.
As you do at that age.
Yeah. I was an ugly teenager. Anyone's got the right to be ugly, but I abused the privilege, right? And I had that awful. I think back now, this I am more ashamed of this than the fighting. But I was that kid where no girl ever looked at me twice. And I these days, I might have been radicalized by the internet. Back then, I just wrote sad poetry and emo lyrics. But I then got to an age where I could kind of talk to girls better than my friends could. And then women started showing interest. I'm still ugly, but like I could talk to women. I'm also very aware my wife is downstairs listening to this conversation. And,
just a reminder, the key phrase in all this is was.
Yeah, very much. And girls, I was 15, 16, showed an interest in me for the first time. And it's such a cliche. I wasn't able to kind of deal with it. So I was with a girl and I just messed around kissing other girls and stuff like that, because I couldn't say no because I'd never had that attention. And I see this shit now in like adult men right? Men who are like in their 40s and 50s, and I'm like, clearly what's happening, you've never felt attractive, and now you are just like acting like a child because you've got a bit of attention. And I can sort of just about forgive myself when I was 15, but I just think, thank God I got it in my system then, because you see some messes in older life with the same sort of hang-ups in people. But yeah, my first girlfriend, bless, was a wonderful girl. I just treated her poorly. So yeah, they're the two people I would say I remember hurting the first time.
Okay.
Yeah, not uncommon. Mine was a similar answer, not emotional or anything, but yeah, just schoolyard. Actually, not even really a schoolyard scuffle. It was in preschool, and I accidentally backed into a girl and fell on her and broke her collarbone.
Oh,
so it's kind of a cop-out answer when you think about it, because I didn't really intentionally hurt her, but that
it was your first memory of hurting someone. That's
exactly
a fair answer.
Yeah. Children hurt other children. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, I have no. Weird with me is I have no negative emotion attached to the fights. I still kind of feel justified.
I mean, yeah, that was the thing. Like, children are also awful people, so it is justified. If they say something awful, they get repercussions.
So, I mean, the point of the thing is, people are like stories. I mean, their books have story arcs for a reason. It's because people often have what's the word now? Character development themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, some people do, some people don't. Maybe their arc is a flat line, but it's not uncommon for these kinds of things to happen. But what's interesting about talking about them is because different people will remember different things, like Chris remembered, his situation. But while you're talking about it, you talk about things that are important to you in terms of your values and the things that you've learned since then and things like that. And like in this case, you're talking about, fighting bullies. So that can be something that maybe will crop up again later in the call. We don't know yet. Having empathy towards a girlfriend, that maybe that'll crop up again. We don't know. So
empathy is the weird word, because the thing I've realized about myself is that I learned empathy, true empathy, way too late. And it's really strange because not too late, but way later than I should have. And it's really strange because I have always been a reader and I've always had the most intense empathy for characters. Mm-hmm. But I think about some of the ways I've behaved, some of the selfish things I've done, and also my kind of social awareness of empathy. The stuff I talk about on my show to do with social justice and to do with, being anti-prejudice and equality. And up until worryingly late in my life, I had never had a kind of empathetic thought about those issues. I was just, I was never cruel. I never ever partook in any kind of prejudice, but I was just a typical selfish bloke moving along in my bubble. It's not my problem. And it's only really later in life, often in many ways, like I would say that like 75% of my progress has been made in the last 4 years while speaking to writers on the podcast. And that's something that I do worry about, that I didn't have enough empathy for too long. So it's interesting you mentioned that.
I would say the fact that you worry about that you don't have enough empathy is a sign of empathy itself.
Well, I'll take that.
That is true. So it's very common for a lot of people all over the world to have what are referred to as maladaptive behaviors, where, you talked about your father, who was apparently a nice guy, but also had this thing where every problem looked like a nail and all he had was a hammer. And some people learn that type of behavior in their childhood, and then as they grow up and get outside of their family and start to access the rest of the world, one of two things happens. Either they realize that they have this situation where all I have is a hammer and everything looks like a nail, and it's either it works for them and they never change, or it doesn't work for them, and one of two things happens, and they figure out other ways of dealing with the world, or they never do. They might recognize that there's a problem, but they struggle to find another solution to the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's when those kinds of behaviors turn into what's referred to as maladaptive, because you're not able to properly adapt them. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like in your case, potentially, that, being raised in this tough environment, maybe like you say, you were able to empathize with other characters, but there were certain maybe beliefs that you carried about what was or is not appropriate to feel towards other people related to how you're brought up. And then, as you became older and accessed the rest of the world, you started to realize, okay, maybe there's room for improvement here, or maybe not improvement, but I can adjust, things like that. And that's something that happens to a lot of people. So it's not uncommon at all.
Mm-hmm.
So flipping that last question around to the positive, do you remember the first person you helped?
I'm not saying it's the first person, but it's the first person that really comes to mind.
Sure.
And it kind of it is kind of flipping it around. It's about bullies again. I hate bullies. The reason for my anger at the state of politics in the modern world with Trump and Boris Johnson and Elon Musk is because they're just fucking well-funded bullies. That's all they are. They're nothing more than a well-funded schoolyard bully. And I know that sounds trite and superficial. I mean every word I say. That's all. The psychology.
They're trite and superficial.
Yeah. But what I mean is that I'm not making some easy kind of clickbaity, headliney comment. I mean it. That their psychology transparently is just that of the schoolyard bully. They've just got backing. And I hate bullying. And when I was at school, I was as immature and as obnoxious and as sometimes cruel as all young kids are. But I had a strangely grown up attitude to bullying. If I ever saw it, I had this compulsion to stop it. And I think that is the flip side of my dad as well, because my dad can't stand bullies. Anyway, there was a young lad who joined our school, and he was called Mark, and he joined my school, which was a grammar school, very nice, free, but very nice school. And he joined the school because he had been bullied unbearably out of his last school by, weirdly, someone I knew from my scout brigade. And I can't really say I did anything, discreet, but I decided that I sort of took him under my wing. And weirdly, despite being a tiny little man who, as I said, you can put in your pocket, I've always had a personality that's kind of bigger than my frame. And people in my peer group, people have always kind of listened to me. I think it's just I'm so goddamn loud, right? But I walk into rooms and just like presume confidence I have no right to have. And people used to like listen to me at school. I took him a moment and I brought him into our group. And he was always the butt of the jokes still. There was something about the kid, right? He was still always the butt of the jokes. But he was the butt of the jokes inside a group of guys who we could joke. But if anyone else joked, he was protected and he felt safe and he felt part of things. And I don't think of that in any kind of pride, because it's how you should god damn well behave. But that's the first time I think if he hadn't met me, he may have not had as good an experience. And it comes to mind, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Let me think. Did we miss anything from childhood? No, I think that covered everything. So rolling into teen years then, what media jumps out to you from your teen years, whether it's books or movies or what have you?
So, I mean, this is the King territory, right? This is Stephen King. And I don't want to talk exclusively because everyone does, but everyone claims they're a Stephen King fan. I'm a Stephen King fan, right?
I mean,
everyone hasn't read literally
year,
every single book. Yeah.
You spoke to Nat Cassidy. Nat Cassidy is the one person I will accept is more of a King fan than me. But I read it when I was somewhere between 11 and like 13. I don't remember where exactly. And that book changed my life. And there are two things I experienced in my teenage years that fundamentally course corrected my life. And they are the book It and the song Thunder Road by Bruce Springsteen. And I've told you before, but my sis, I've got three older sisters, much older, more like my mum's age, from my dad's first marriage. And I was at one of their houses and she had this extensive vinyl collection. And she went out one day and I would have been, I don't know, 15 or something like that. And she had this Bruce Springsteen live album. It was like 8 LPs. And I didn't know. I remember not knowing the difference between Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan. And I put this album on and it starts with a live version of Thunder Road. And this haunting, howling harmonica starts to play. And he starts singing this story of like youth and young manhood and breaking free and the American dream and the tarnished American dream, and it set fire to my heart. Like I've never felt anything like the reaction I felt to hearing that song and the songs and it's not my favorite Springsteen song. The River is my favorite Springsteen song, but Thunder Road, I heard it and it was like it welded itself to my imagination. And coupled with King, I had this, I spent my teenage years longing for an American boyhood. I wanted to be River Phoenix in Stand By Me. You know, I wanted to be in the Losers Club. I wanted that American childhood. And that was kind of like the dominant theme of my teenage years. I was always put after that sort of a nostalgia for a thing I'd never experienced and this sepia tone vision of America. There's a reason that my favorite film ever is Forrest Gump, because for all its flaws, that is a film that's all about the myth of America. And this is why I'm so goddamn sad about Trump, because they're breaking my favorite myth, right? And but yeah, King and Springsteen, that's the big stuff. But I'll let you ask another question because I could talk this for hours.
Well, you mentioned it. What do you like about it? Briefly, yes. Sorry, I talked too much. Actually, I can answer it really simply. I don't think you talk too much. I was just making the joke since you just mentioned it.
Okay, I do talk too much.
And I don't care. I'm not the one who edits these.
Yeah, right.
Well, I can answer the question about it really quickly, right? Forget it's a good story. Forget that all life is in there. Forget it's a whole town, right? All of that, right? The best horror is not about the monster, nor is it about the thing that fights the monster. It's about the fight. And I think it just is the perfect manifestation of that.
That is a pretty good summary. Anything else jump out to you from your teen years that you want to mention?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, that's when I got into... my late teens, if I come to think of it. I started at my teen years. I went to university at 18 and I got obsessed by Gothic because I'd done horror and I'd read King, I read James Herbert, I'd seen all the movies. But then I got introduced to Gothic and Dracula and Wuthering Heights and that sweet spot of Gothic that isn't horror but is adjacent to it, but it's as much fascination as it is terror. And we're still on that train 25 years later. But in terms of like other media when I was in my teens, like Halloween, I think is still one of the greatest horror films ever made. Like people watch it now and go, oh, it's not scary because it's too old. Like, that film is terrifying to me. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I said before about the most primal scene in all of horror for me was the thing with Tina, being killed in Nightmare on Elm Street. The one that comes a close second, and if an alien landed and was to say to me, what is horror? I would show them 10 seconds of footage, and it would be the scene, and I watched this again last week, it would be the scene in Texas Chainsaw when the guy is walking in the hallway and out of Leatherface bursts out of that door, hits him with the hammer, drags him through the door, and it's the way the door slams, right? And I've struggled to articulate this, and the closest I can get is this. That door slams in a way that for that character, it will never open again. That door symbolizes somehow in Toby Hooper's accidental genius, it symbolizes the one-way route between life and death in that slam of a corrugated metal door. And every time I see that scene, it's like they've captured lightning in a bottle, because all the man does is slam a door. I don't think they've storyboarded the perfect door slam, but it just nails it. Yeah. And the other thing, but I won't talk about The Exorcist too much now because possession, big old theme in my life, but The Exorcist, I saw the unrated version when it was the unrated version on like a bootleg VHS that a friend's dad gave to me years before all of the messing around, the reissuing and the re-release in the cinema. This was like a gritty, shitty version of that film with the crab walk that I watched when I was probably, I don't know, somewhere between 14 and 16. And I remember lying in bed that night. I said that nothing disturbed me much. My God, I lay in bed that night looking up at the hatch in my bedroom ceiling, which was exactly the same as the hatch in Reagan's ceiling, thinking, oh no, oh no. Right, yeah, they're three pretty textbook answers. I'm sorry, there's nothing much that's interesting in there, but they did a number on me.
No shit. For good reason.
It's funny you went straight from Texas Chainsaw to Exorcist, because the way you were describing how Leatherface just assaults the guy with the hammer, I was thinking like, yeah, that and that one scene from, was it The Exorcist 3, I think, with
the scissors?
Yes.
Yeah.
The woman who
Yeah.
just like dashes across the hallway out of nowhere.
That's weird. That's never got me. I don't know. I think I've seen that memeified perhaps before I saw the film, perhaps. Because it never bothered me all that.
Actually, same here. Yeah, I almost didn't even notice it originally watching it. And then you see it everywhere and you're like, all right, yeah, that is kind of startling, but wasn't affected by it.
I like how wacky it is. That's good because it has almost nothing to do with the movie. That's fun. Right. But
it does kind of remind me a bit of Monty Python. You know? It's like,
yeah.
The way she's so stiff and her walk is stiff, just like, ah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny you went from Texas Chainsaw to The Exorcist because when you mentioned Texas Chainsaw, that's what that made me think of.
So for recurring dreams in your teens, you mentioned Freddy. Any others?
Oh God, I don't know. I have no memories of dreams in my teens. Really. It was mostly dreams of, almost getting the girl and not quite.
Okay. Anything in real life terrify you as a teen?
Yeah, well, yes, this is an easy one. I was in
Not getting the girl.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was in a pretty bad car crash when I was 17. I still can't drive because of this. So this is right. So basically, in a nutshell, it was the night before my first A-level exam, which are the exams that determine your university place. And we went out for a drive, and my friend picked me up, and he was a bit of a... Do you have the phrase boy racer in the US? Do you use that phrase?
No, but I kind of understand what it is. Just a guy who likes to race a lot, drift cars and things like that.
Silly little boys who drive cars too fast, right? And he was a bit boy racer, and he picked me up, and he picked a friend of ours called Steph up, and we went for a drive, and we stopped for another one of our friends. We're on the way to the pub to get served underage in this pub, and we stopped for another one of our friends who at the last minute said, I'm not going to come, and went home. And we set off, and it would have been about 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and we're driving through my little sleepy village, and as you come out of this little village, you go over a bridge, and my friend is doing like 70 on a 30-mile-an-hour road. And he lost control of the car. I remember, I have to be careful because I have flashbacks to this. He was Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, ironically, was playing on the radio. And my friend jerked the steering wheel and lost control. And we took off. We took off, and our tyres, the bottom of our tyres hit the guardrail of the bridge, and it flipped us. And we flipped several times, and we dropped about 20 foot into a river. Upside down, and I came to underwater upside down. No real sense of where I was. I remember opening I opened my seatbelt and I fell and I banged my head on the top of the car, so I knew I was upside down. This doesn't upset me anymore, so I can talk about it. But I had this thought: so this is how I die, and obviously I was not exactly in a cognizant state of mind here, so I can't say it means anything. But all I remember, there was zero fear, and all I felt was this abject sadness that my parents would be so sad. Wow. And then somehow I was then out of the car. I don't know how. And we got the girl out of the car. And the freaky bit is, my friend who didn't come, where he would have been sitting was where the car had hit the ground, and it was crushed. And the three of us were totally unmarked, not a scratch on any of us. But the weird thing is, we're in this river, and the road is like 20 foot up, and no one knows we're down there. So we're like yelling up until someone walking the dog walked past, and they called an ambulance, and the fire brigade came, and then they got us out and went to hospital. And I had best part of a decade of quite severe PTSD, which has finally relinquished itself. And now I'm trying to learn to drive, but it put me off for years. But that really, really didn't help with that anxiety I mentioned about, like, if you go away and anything can happen at any time, right? You can never see people again. Mm-hmm. And that really didn't help with that. And I had the exam the next day, which was hard work. And then I was fine. I remember this kind of like survivor's euphoria. Me and my friend who crashed the car were having like jousting matches with crutches and wheelchairs in the hospital. And then I went to university about 6 months later, and it maybe longer, maybe a year later. And that's when it all crumbled. That's when I went to pieces and had to get therapy. I was a mess. So that is like probably the defining fright of my life.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Understandably. Yeah, there are multiple levels of reasons why that is a terrifying experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting the way you described it, how like your thoughts at that time, how just your I don't know, your subconscious mind almost automatically goes to those things where you wouldn't intentionally think these things, but just immediate automatic thought is the dismay at how sad your parents would be. You're just like, oh, this is the end. Oh, my parents are going to be sad.
Yeah. It's the reason I don't, if I fly on my own, I hate flying. If I fly with my wife, I couldn't care less. You know,
I could make a really bad joke there. That's
no, I like that though. She's there with you, so if anything bad happens, you go together.
Yeah, exactly.
That was kind of along the lines of the joke I was going to make. I thought that would have been a little bad taste. There won't be anybody to worry about you.
Oh no, that's literally what I mean. Like, because she won't miss me.
I know, but that's why I feel bad about making it a joke. And to answer your question, so instead of boy racer here, we would just say street racer, and that's implied boy because there are very few women who would do that. So
yeah, but it also sounds cooler. Street racer.
Oh, yeah.
Boy racers are not cool. They're little spotty teenagers.
Well, they're not really cool here either, but I'm sure they like to think so.
Chavs with cars.
Chavs, yes, chavs. Yeah, exactly that.
So rolling into adult years, what's really stood out to you in terms of horror media in your adult years?
Right, I mean, this is right. So we're getting into it now. So, so I did a PhD in contemporary horror fiction, and I went from being somebody who was so anti kind of I was kind of ignorant, right? I began. No one has ever begun doctoral studies with less knowledge than I did. I basically began my PhD in horror going, I've read a lot of Stephen King books. I can do this. I knew nothing. And I had a very, very, very narrow horizons in the kind of fiction I wanted to read. Somehow, going from somebody who just liked simple stories, I ended up spending 4 years of my life focused on metafictional horror and the most experimental horror stories you can think of. So meta stuff is a big part of my mid to late 20s when I was studying that. And House of Leaves stands above all. House of Leaves kind of became the framework to my life for 5 years because all I did was write
is that
things.
The one that's...
it's the book that's like
the
upside
book where
down.
It has, yeah, and various pages have the text in just different forms, sometimes spiraling, sometimes sideways. Yeah, I've got to pick that up.
So in a nutshell, House of Leaves is like a 700-page... book's even a strong word. It's a book about right. So in a nutshell, it's a book about a maze. This guy buys a house, and he finds a door in his house that opens into a corridor that is impossible because it's
bigger on the inside.
Yeah, he opens a door in an external wall, and there's a corridor where the garden should be. And at the bottom of this corridor is an endless labyrinth. And he makes a film of exploring what he can of that labyrinth. That's kind of like, think of the book as kind of like a Chinese doll structure. That's the middle of the book. Outside that, you get all of that actually, he makes the film. The film is then you're reading the commentary written by a blind man who, by definition, can't have seen the film. So already you've got a level of uncertainty there. The commentary you're reading is then written in the margins. It's edited and commented upon by this self-confessed liar called Johnny Truant. And then outside that, you've got the editors saying we've adjusted this and we've changed this. So there is no level in that book where you can say what the truth is or what, any kind of consistent narration is. So it's a book that's literally about how there is no meaning to anything and that anything is up for flux. It's the ultimate postmodern novel. And I love it. And it kind of, for 10 years, it was like, for me, it's what horror was because I went right down the tubes with this meta stuff. And then I broke my brain doing the PhD, came very close to an actual nervous breakdown, came off that, went, I never want to read a metafictional book ever again that isn't written by Stephen Graham Jones. and now I'm back on my very earnest, I want earnest horror with heart written by Phil Fracassi. That's why I love Phil's stuff because it's so heartfelt. So yeah, so that's the book side of things. Film-wise, my favourite horror movie ever is The Descent by Neil Marshall. The spelunking film. Mm-hmm. For numerous reasons. You would never get me down a cave. I think those people are lunatics and they should be, taken away and looked after.
Right? Yeah, I agree. I love The Descent. It's one of my all-time favorite films, but you will never catch me in a situation where you have to get from point A to point B by shimmying through an area that is no bigger than you.
Indeed.
No, thank you.
It's ridiculous. It's a ludicrous thing for human beings to be doing. Should be banned. And that film, I mean, talk about jump scares. The bit when you first see the crawler, when it's just stood at the end of the row. Oh my God, that. There's a funny story. My mum, who's not really into horror films, watched that randomly and then said, "Oh, you got to watch this film." And I remember we watched it in the kitchen on our tiny little portable TV while my dad was in the front room. We watched it and I was like, why is she staring at me? And for like 20, she'd forgotten when that. She'd forgotten when that
she was waiting for it. She's just watching it.
Yeah, she'd forgotten when that happened. So for like 20 minutes, she was just looking at the side of my head. Like, what? And then it happened and I nearly went over the back of the chair. Yeah, it's my favourite horror movie. And other thing, like, I've never loved Blair Witch, but I love found footage.
Yeah.
So like Lake Mungo is a big one for me, you know.
Yes.
But then it comes back to Gothic, and I think this podcast called Horror Makes Us Happy. The films that really make me happy. It's kind of weird because The Descent is my favourite film, but it kind of stands alone because I'm not sure. Here's a bombshell to drop on you an hour and 15 minutes in. I'm not sure I like horror. What I like is intrigue, and I just tend to prefer my intrigue when it's got monsters in it or ghosts. Mm-hmm. I like stories about secrets and about locked rooms and what's in the attic and what did the manor, what did the owner of the manor do 30 years ago that he can't talk about, and what's in the cellar, and I love that stuff, like unpeeling the onion, and that's more Gothic than horror, really. So my favourite movies, the ones I could put on any time, are things like The Others with Nicole Kidman. Or, I mean, I'm a staunch advocate for Daniel Radcliffe's version of The Woman in Black. I think it's a perfect movie. I love The Conjuring. I mean, that is more horror, but it's still that Gothic sort of vibe, like, what's haunting this house. I love those kind of films way more than I love Humans with Axes or stuff. There's outliers. I love The Strangers. I think that's a fantastic movie. But the films that I would be kind of like, I really want to see this, that would have me like salivating, is the stuff that's more like that. Like, I saw Heretic this week with Hugh Grant. Didn't love it as much as I thought I would, but it appealed to me so much with its premise of spooky house, spooky situation. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I really love.
Okay.
I have a feeling I'm going to have a similar experience with Heretic because it's gotten so much hype and I've been looking forward to it and I really want to see it. But I'm sure it'll still be good. But yeah, is the hype slightly more than the experience?
I would say it's a weird film. It's a film that's only going to please. I think it's a film that's going to please a much smaller segment of the audience than it thinks it will. So it's 45 minutes of very, very dense conversation that I found absorbing. Then it's 45.
Well, it's Hugh Grant.
Yeah, exactly. He's so good in it. And then it's 45 minutes of something that's much more typically horror that I found far well done, but far less absorbing. And the problem with the film is, I think the filmmakers think the first 45 minutes sets the scene for the second 45. I think there's a complete disconnect between them. So it's like a 10 out of 10 and a 5 out of 10. So it's go and see it, but really try and enjoy the first hour.
Okay. No, that was a very good, succinct way of describing it without spoiling anything.
So you mentioned The Descent and the jump scare, but I mean, to say that something is your favorite because of a jump scare seems a little bit brief, shall we say?
Well, it's because, he has that memory of it. But
still, it's not. Yeah. That's not why it's my favorite. It's the scariest film I've ever seen. I just think, in terms of, no. The films that really scare me are the ones that get in my head and haunt me. And I've still not got into this, but remind me about Emily Rose in a minute. Okay. But The Descent is my favorite, what I would call fun horror movie, where the fear was enjoyable. So I was never disturbed. I was enjoying the ride. And it was like, that has scared me a lot, but I never felt, it was never unpleasant. That's why it's my favorite film. I also just love that it's like 5 women. I just think for when it was made, that was a really bold thing to do, and it doesn't in any way. And they don't really
push it in your face or call attention to it or anything. It just happens to be 5 women that are friends that go spelunking.
Yeah, it's just really.
It took me like 3 watches to even notice that. Like, it is all women. Good.
Well, yeah, because if you made that with all men, it would have been Predator, right? You know what I mean? It's like it's a different. So I think it's great. I love it so much, but it's because it's the scariest fun movie I've ever seen, closely followed by The Conjuring. But the other stuff, and talking about my adult life and where my relationship with horror really is is much more problematic. There are so many films I can't watch these days, or that I'm nervous to watch, because all of the anxiety I've talked about throughout this conversation, hypochondria, losing loved ones, all of that, gone. I'm fine. Not hypochondriac, I'm okay with the risk of life. I'm fine. Something has happened to me in the last 6 or so years where I've become like a child in terms of the goofy shit. So, like, if I watch a film now, like The Ring, for example, I have to unplug the TV. Like, I'm so susceptible to like anything that gets into your head and makes you think like, oh God, what if? Even though I don't believe in ghosts at all, and I don't believe in any of this stuff, it scares me so much. And if I can trace it back, it starts with The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the Derrickson movie. I'm trying to get Derrickson on my show to talk about it, or maybe put it to bed. Oh my God, that scared me so badly.
Yeah, that's a found footage as well, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's... Are you thinking of The Taking of Deborah Logan?
Well, no, but that was also a good one. But no, yeah, I think there were some videotaped parts of The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Maybe I blocked it out.
What'd you like about Lake Mungo?
I just think it's brilliant. I mean, it's difficult. I don't think it's a horror film for a start, and I'm always a bit baffled by people who say it's the scariest thing they've ever seen. Like, Paul Tremblay loves that film and is really scared by it. Now, Paul Tremblay can screw me up better than pretty much any writer currently working. I mean, Head Full of Ghosts, again, a possession drama, all about doubt. Oh my God, scariest book, second scariest book I've read this century. And Lake Mungo scares him. And I think it's utterly unaffecting, but I think it's a story so beautifully told. And I also think I love anything that uses static images, where it shows you a static image and says, right, you find the thing in this that's important. And I believe there's a film called Savage Land that Trevor Henderson recommended.
Yes.
I haven't seen it, but I believe it does something quite similar. Mm-hmm. I'm going to watch it soon. I love that device. Here's an image, you work it out. And the fact that, and this is spoiler free, but the fact I've never seen a film before that does what Lake Mungo does, which is make revelations in its credit sequence so pivotal to the truth of the movie.
Okay, now I'm going to have to rewatch Lake Mungo. I don't remember the credit sequence.
There are images shown in the credit sequence which recontextualize what you've seen.
Okay.
And I think that's such a bold thing to do. And I love found footage. I particularly love mockumentary way more than, here we're lost in the woods, like The Outwaters. Excuse me, fuck off. I'm not into stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
thank you. Like that, it keeps popping back up in my feed too. I watched it. I'm one and done with that one.
There is
it seemed like there was a good premise at first, but in the end of Outwaters, you're like, what am I watching?
Well, quite literally, I'm not saying that everyone who likes Outwaters is pompous, but there's a certain kind of pompous fan who likes to talk about films like that and Skinamarink as if they are a new form of cinema. It's bad filmmaking. It's literally it's the equivalent of writing a book with a lot of misspelled words. You're breaking the medium. If you're making a visual medium indecipherable to the eye, you're not making a good film. I'm getting a bit strident. Apologise. But so that's the downfall of found footage. Like, the raw of it. We can't see things. It's all over the place. I love a mockumentary because it shows you all the ingredients, and it has the medium that allows you to go, here's what you need to know in quite a systematic way. But Lake Mungo does that and then goes, you work out what's going on. I think it's so cool.
So I think you mentioned The Descent was your favorite movie. Did you say that favorite movie?
It's my favorite horror movie, probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Forrest Gump is my favorite movie.
Okay. What do you like about Forrest Gump?
I think it's, oh God, what? So I start crying about 5 minutes in, and I just basically slowly seep all the way through to the end. It's just a beautiful film. Now, I feel weird talking about Forrest Gump these days because I'm quite blind to its flaws. And I'm sure I'm sure Gen Z watching Forrest Gump will be like, oh my God, this film is full of like racial stereotypes or, misogyny, or overlooking the fact that it's basically about a man with a an impairment that is treated for laughs sometimes. Like, but sometimes you're just blind to a film's flaws, right? And you can over intellectualize things sometimes. I just love that movie, and I'll always love it. I'm never going to go actually. The Friends thing where people now go, "Oh, Friends was terrible because there's no diversity, and it's like it makes gay jokes, and like we've retconned Friends almost as this terrible thing." Like, no one can ever do that with Forrest Gump to me. I love it. I think it's a fable about America, about like the American dream, and I don't mean the economic American dream, although he manages to get that. I mean this dream of all the things I said at the start about life. Springsteen. What did you say? Sorry,
I said having a halfway decent life.
Well, yeah, there is that. Yeah, meaning something to somebody. And like, here's a really pompous way to put it. Right, I make myself cringe sometimes. But it's a film that says life is full of poetry, and it's sentimental. But life is sentimental, and I think Gen X went through this spasm of like cynicism. That's why we got so much meta, right? We got so much irony in Gen X. Bret Easton Ellis exists because of that, But that it was an earnest cynicism almost. It was an earned cynicism. I feel like now we live in a world that is just with like Bitcoin and AI and tech bros and the endless optimization of life to be more productive.
Now it's a weary cynicism.
But it's weary for those of us who are subjected to it. It's not weary for the people who are reigning supreme during it. It's a nasty, opportunistic cynicism. We live in a world in which people want to squeeze every dollar out of every situation and get every inch of clout out of everything they can get. And it feels like people whose life is full of whimsy are just derided now as almost foolish. And I'm one of those people. My life is whimsy. Like, I love stories. I live for stories. I don't care about AI or tech or the financial markets. I don't give a shit. I love stories, right? So I'm the kind of person that the people in power, they think I'm foolish. Forrest Gump is a film that celebrates all the things I care about. Basically, for all its flaws, it's a film about whimsy and about the sentimentality that I believe is still at the core of life. That may be the most pompous thing I've ever said in my life, and I apologize, but I do stand by it.
No. It almost sounds like you're talking about this odd thing that I heard mythos of one day. I believe it's called altruism.
Yes, yeah, being nice. It's that fabled thing that we used to have.
Mm-hmm. It is a fable at this point.
Yeah. What I was going to say is that maybe there's a disconnect between how certain things are taken on your side of the pond versus ours. For me, I think liking the things that you like about Forrest Gump is not pompous. It's actually more what we would consider humble. And what I was saying a minute ago about weary cynicism, what I was referring to is you were talking about, Gen X having sort of an earned cynicism, which I interpreted to mean because we were really coming to terms with really how cynical the world really is. There are, people in control that are fucking things up. And what I was saying about, Gen Alpha and Gen Z is that theirs is a weary cynicism because like Gen X, it was an angry cynicism. Or,
yes.
You say earned, I would maybe say angry. But it has continued with no end in sight. And so that's why I feel like maybe the following generations, it's more of a weary cynicism.
Yeah.
Because they're born into it.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it too. I have seen, there was this meme that I saw going around talking about how Gen X was around to have seen enough of the American dream to know what we've lost, compared to Gen Z and Gen Alpha that, they've grown up in this shithole from the start. They never experienced what we did. So anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
So as far as common themes of what kind of horror you like, you mentioned supernatural, I guess, monsters, that kind of thing.
Yeah, stuff with. I love monster movies. They're fun. I love monsters. I never get tired of monsters. Like any monster, I always want to see it. I want to know more about it. I want to. But the films I really love are the ones about haunted houses or the town with the secret, or something to delve into that isn't just about the immediate horror. I like a history to a horror story.
Okay. So this would normally be the spot where we talk about any common themes that have been cropping up through the call, and then maybe talk about those for a little bit. It's kind of interesting because the main theme, I would say, is fighting the monster. And a lot of things that we've talked about kind of align under that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it about fighting bullies, but also, the phrase you used, "Here be dragons," when we were talking about Ulysses. And was it Ulysses, the Cyclops? Or
Odysseus, yeah. Yes.
Even, the door slamming in Texas Chainsaw. I mean, there's dragons behind that door.
Mm.
Also, Freddy Krueger. And so some of the things that you talked about, the supernatural and fear of possession, I think maybe are so triggering to you because maybe those are things that you can't fight, and you're afraid that you can't fight them.
You nailed it. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. And this, one thing I've noticed about myself that I kind of come to a conclusion. We didn't mention it earlier. I don't know why I didn't think of it, but the first movie that I really remember scaring me was The Terminator, which I watched with my dad when I was like 8 or something. And years later, I was scared, bizarrely, by the movie Jeepers Creepers, which is a silly film, and it scared the hell out of me. And I thought, and then I realized that they are the same film. They're both about this thing that will pursue you and it will never stop. And they both even end in a police station, right, where everyone gets killed. They're the same film. And I really struggle with an enemy that you can't fight. Because I'm not scared of fighting something. I'm scared of the thought of not being able to fight it. And like the stuff with possession, it's more like you can never know. How do you fight something where you don't know what the rules are? There's nothing to hit. There's nothing to, to kill. And in my real world, it comes through to if I was to talk about genuine fears, like there was no point to bring it up until now, but when I have like a really anxious moment, I'm obsessed by the thought of rabies to the point where I can't read the word rabies without, even now I'm getting like a flutter in my stomach. Rabies is the terminator of diseases, right? Mm-hmm. Once it's after you, you can't cure it. You're going to die. And yeah, so you've nailed it. It's the thing you can't fight. It's the unavoidable death or the unavoidable, whatever that you have no way of combating. That terrifies me. In an unpleasant way. That when I said before about the Descent is my favourite fun horror movie, that's a fun horror. But when I said right at the start, I've had this weird relationship with fear. The things we talk about now, the Terminator, Jeepers Creepers, demonic possession, bloody The Thing from The Ring, or like rabies, they're not fun to me. They haunt me.
And I think the intrigue, the monsters and the secrets, I wonder if is there a thing here I can fight?
Maybe. Because the monster is something that's physically present that you can fight, whereas rabies is coming from within you.
Well, it's the unknown of, is the thing that I am currently unaware of, because I don't know it. Is this the thing I can fight, or is this something I should be afraid of because I can't? Okay.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because my favorite scene in any horror movie, people know this about me, I love the let's go to the library and read the microfiche scene.
Yes.
Or read the books and pour over the history. And it's happened before. My favourite trope in all of horror, when they go, it's happened before. Again, back to Derrickson, I love the movie Sinister for that reason, because it's the slow unravelling of the mystery of this thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right, because I think that is me through the character amassing information, and information is power.
Right. And when you're the research in the library is, what's my angle? How can I fight it?
Yeah.
Can I fight it?
Yeah, it's almost a turnaround. You get the terror, the despair, and then it's almost like the stages of grief acceptance.
Well, potentially
that's when you turn around and fight. You muster up your arsenal, as it were.
So I'll also then now tie this back to sharing narratives with your father. You mentioned, a lot of him being this tough person and the strength, not being afraid of anything, not backing down from a fight, potentially your values and belief systems about what's important in life, either what's worth fighting about or just the fight itself.
This year, I am getting a tattoo on my arm, and it's a tattoo I've wanted for years. And not to bang the same drum over and over, but it's from it. And it's the final line. No, it's not the final line. It's actually, I always think it's the final. It's not. It's the end of a section. And the full quote is, it goes on, it says, so drive away from Derry, Bill Denver is driving away. He's leaving Derry for the last time. And the quote in full goes something like this: put some rock and roll on the radio. Drive towards all the life there is to live with all the belief that you can find and all the courage you can muster. And the part I'm getting tattooed on my arm is the next line. Be true, be brave, stand. All the rest is darkness. And I want that on my arm because I want to look at it every time I have a bad day. Because that's what I do believe. And there's another line that King writes. He says, it doesn't matter how you got here. It only matters that you're here and you're still on your feet. No, he says, the place where you made a stand never mattered. It only matters that you got there and you're still on your feet. And they are such cheesy lines, but my God, do I stand. That's like the core of what I believe.
Good beliefs to have.
Yeah.
The natural follow-up question to that would be, why is that important to you?
What a difficult question to answer. I kind of think it's the only credo or code or what motto, whatever maxim that works for life, because I'm all about realism. I'm always like, the sun isn't always going to be shining, and as the current world is telling us, right? And let's be honest, I've not been through much adversity in my life. I've had a very, very easy life compared to the vast majority of people alive. Incredibly easy life. But there's been bad days, and I don't think how you are on your best day is as important as how you are on your worst day. And I do think that all the rest is darkness. I think so much of life is dark, and it's about protecting the bit that's not. And so be true and be brave and make a stand for what matters to you, because I don't think anything else really matters.
There's a quote that I saw somewhere that I'm not going to paraphrase correctly, but the gist of it was something along the lines of how it's a strange world where those who want to be lovers have to learn how to fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As you're saying, because nothing else matters, because if you're not around to... you can't love if you're not here. You know what I mean? It's.
I mean, I do want to be clear that I hope when I've been using the words like fight, that I'm not talking about fisticules.
Right,
here. I mean, there's times for that, but I'm talking about standing up for what matters to you. Against the bullies. The world is basically bullies and everyone else, and that's a really incredibly reductive thing to say, but I think it's fairly true. I think there are two camps of people in the world, and it's bullies and everyone else. And we need enough of the other people to stand up against the bullies. And I think that's the only way the world keeps turning. And I'd rather be one of the people who stands up against the bullies in whatever form that takes. That's all. I mean, it's the least profound thing you could ever say, but that's what that line means to me. Be truly brave.
I don't think it has to be profound. It's just the way things should be.
Yeah.
So why horror? Can't you explore these things in other genres, or do you?
Well, you can, but horror just gives you such good monsters, right? I mean, I'll tell you why. No, I'll tell you why. I think horror allows you to raise the stakes. I think. And also, I'm not that insightful into myself. I just like creepy shit. Right. So for a start, I just really dig creepy stuff. But in terms of relation to the point I was just making, I think horror gives you the best canvas for that, because you can make the bad really bad and therefore make the good really heroic in response just by standing against it.
True. Well, that's the end of the line for all the questions we've got. I think it was a very interesting conversation, and we got a pretty good summary of what's important to you and why.
Yeah, I've never felt more pompous than I feel right now. I feel like I've been late. I do this sometimes. I start to hear myself sounding a bit like some kind of, Russell Brand figure laying down these maxims from on high. It just makes me cringe. Like, I'm just one guy who has some thoughts, and I start adopting this really over-the-top register when I start talking about them. So I'm really not this up my own arse most of the time. But it's just when people ask me questions, I let rip.
Again, the fact that you recognize it probably means you're not pompous.
Well, another thing maybe I could add too is that I've had multiple years of counseling and almost more than 20 years in a 12-step program now. And it's almost amusing looking back on a lot of the things that I had heard in both counseling and 12-step stuff, that there were phrases that sounded trite and things that I had heard 1,000 times before, but didn't until I lived through certain other things. Those things they were trite because I didn't feel that they applied to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I had learned a couple other things that then the things that seemed trite, like I needed additional context to get to the place where those things didn't sound trite anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I can understand how on one level things do sound trite, especially if you're talking to somebody who doesn't have the additional context that you've lived through, or to be afraid that it sounds trite to somebody who hasn't lived through some of the things that you've lived through. But if you do have some of that additional context, sometimes, like, I don't want to say that trite isn't a bad thing, but maybe a better way to say it is being succinct isn't a bad thing. I mean, sometimes truth is succinct. It's just that you need to have the additional context to understand the reality of the truth.
I'll take that defense. Yeah, that excuse. Yeah.
It's not an excuse. I think it's a reality. It's just not everybody is in the same mindset to perceive that. And I definitely wasn't when I got into counseling and 12-step stuff. So, life is a journey. So do you think there's anything that came up earlier in the call that you didn't get a chance to say? Something that maybe you thought of, but then the conversation took a left turn?
I mean, I think you've heard quite enough from me about myself this time. No, I'll probably go away and end up having a real soul-searching moment tonight now where I think about this.
Good?
No. Yeah, no, good. It's always good.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably films I could have talked about and books I could have talked about, but they would have all been further riffs on a theme because I only contain so many multitudes, right?
Speaking of Whitman.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, before I hit the closing, you want to wrap by telling everybody again what you're currently working on and where they can find it. And by the way, we'll put together a bio for you and link to whatever you want to, so you don't have to worry about, spelling out links and all that.
Okay. So the podcast is Talking Scared. It's on all the podcast platforms. There's like 220 episodes now, and I've spoken to everyone, including Stephen King, twice.
Nice.
Yeah. And Mike Flanagan, actually, which is quite nice. I'm on all the social media places at Talk Scared Pod. I'm trying to migrate off Twitter a little bit, so Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, a lot. And back in December 17th with Christmas specialist stuff, and all through next year. The one thing I haven't mentioned that I'm doing next year is with Nat Cassidy, friend of your parish. I am doing a deep dive into the Dark Tower books. We're going to take them one by one, as well as a few other auxiliary texts. So that should be fun. And my book, Good Boy, is out next October, and pre-orders are available now. And I have sent a copy to Stephen King, and he may be reading it. So that's exciting.
Oh, nice.
I hope so.
Yeah,
awesome.
So that's me.
Cool. Well, again, thank you very much for your time, and thank you to anybody else out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormixeshappy.com. We're still in growth mode, so best thing you can do if you can't support financially is to tell a friend.